Back to another episode of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Discussion series where I talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, player profiles, etc, etc, and tonight we have a new video. Paulo Gonclaves is at it again, getting top 8, I believe, at the LCS that took place tonight. Actually, that is correction. He got top 4 again with another version of his Eldlich Zoo Dogmatika deck. This guy is insane. If you don't know much about Paulo recently, he's been doing very well with this deck, and this one just shows a couple minor changes to it. So if you've seen my last list that I posted about him, you have a general understanding about what the deck is meant to do, how he plays the deck, etc, etc. And this one, he opted to play a different card and a bit of a different lineup when it comes to his Dogmatika engine, but he plays 2 copies of Bunny Blast. Now, Bunny Blast basically just provides monster or spell targeting protection, I believe. It says, during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell card or effect that targets this card, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card and negate the activation. So I think, just judging by his list and the event, we were looking at more spell targeting cards than trap targeting cards like Imperm, so he just decided to kind of throw Bunny Blast in there instead of the standard 3 copies of Zodiac Ram. So let's just go ahead and jump into the profile here and see exactly what he's playing. We have 3 Nibiru, which is standard. We have 1 copy of Eldlich the Golden Lord, which he played the single copy in his last list as well. 1 copy of Fleur de Lis. 1 Maximus Dragma. This card is really good, and I listened to his profile and his dual commentary when he was going over some of the matches that he played in the last LCS. He really just used this as a utility card to pop cards his opponent controlled by sending the Tis from his extra deck. It also lets him send cards like Omega and the Ignister monster. So these are both really good to have in grave, as this kind of bounces back a resource from your opponent's grave and then puts it back in the deck as well for utility later on. So you're in a way kind of recycling extra deck monsters, so you can utilize its effect multiple times and use Omega's effect in grave multiple times. So it's definitely more of a utility card than kind of like a combo card that you see in a lot of the Invoke decks. I'm a real big fan of this. I'd like to test it. I haven't really had a chance to kind of play around with that list online, as I've been messing around with a lot of other decks, but this idea is really nice. Moving on, we have 3 copies of Skullmeister. Basically, anything that activates in the graveyard, you discard this, negate that effect. It's super great in the meta right now because Diatron was really popular at the event, and so was VW Virtual World, and a lot of their effects activate in grave, and it's good against Virtual World, but I feel like it's even better against Diatron right now. It's also good against Eldlich because you can just negate the Sanguine or negate any of the Golden Land cards in the graveyard. So it has a lot of utility. A lot of people are citing this card, but since this version can play multiple copies of different hand traps, its versatility and usage in the current meta warrants it to be in the main deck, at least for Paulo. I'm not sure if I would personally main deck it, but obviously this worked really well for him. He had a good handle on what decks he expected to see in the event, and yeah, it just played really well for him. So now we have 1 copy of Zodiac Thoroughblade. We'll go to the zoos and then we'll go back to Ecclesia. 1 copy of Whiptail, 2 copies of Bunny Blast that we talked about, the spell targeting negation, and then 1 copy of Zodiac Ram. So this is how I think he's playing, and I can't definitively say this because I haven't really picked his brain about it, and I haven't really kind of gleaned any of this information from him personally, but just kind of how the deck is built. I can look at this and tell that he doesn't really use the zoos as starters, but more as utility. So he uses them when he needs to. It's not like I'm just going to turn 1 normal summon, Slam Dryden over top of it. While that is an option, this definitely seems more utility. So if he needs to put a monster on board that doesn't get targeted or can avoid being targeted by spell effects, he uses Bunny Blast. If he needs the same thing but for traps, he uses Ram. If he needs to punch over a Golden Lord and banish it that's in defense or any of these, in a mirror match, you can use a Whiptail, and Thoroughblade is just generally good. It's a little bit bigger, does piercing damage, it has its own utility. So I definitely feel like these are used more as utility cards, kind of like Maximus here, rather than starters. And once again, that's just my opinion, but it's something to kind of toy around with when you're playing this deck and building this deck, and kind of getting into tournament settings. You're not really using these as starters, even though you can, but they make a bigger kind of impact when you just use them for their specific utility. So rounding up the Dogmatika monsters, we have Ecclesia, the Dogmatika Saint, or the Virtuous, I think is what its English name is. Just one copy. Everything in this deck is searchable. You can add them back from the graveyard using Nadir, so you don't really need to run multiple copies. There's a lot of engines in this deck, so really you have to kind of see exactly like which part of your engines you want to see win, and they all work really well together, so you're always going to have some, you know, play lines. It doesn't... I wouldn't say you're going to be drawing, you know, hands with like the inability to just play the game, especially with all these engines. So I think one copy is fine, considering you have a Fleur-de-Lis and Maximus. Definitely something to just kind of work around if you're, you know, not fond of just playing a single copy. So we play 3 Ash Blossom here, just pretty standard, and then 3 Ghost Bell. This was one that I thought that was really interesting, and I think this was played for the Diatron matchup, because a lot of the cards, the Diatron monsters engrave like tribute from the hand to summon themselves from the grave, so it tributes for cost from the hand, then it would summon and get its effect. You can just bell that and they're basically out a card. So like, let's say your opponent opens like Foolish Burial and a Diatron card in hand. They Foolish Burial a card, so they've lost a card. They use the effect in the graveyard to tribute from hand, then you get belled. It's basically a 2-for-1 at that point. Puts your opponent behind the clock. One thing to note is this card does negate activation, I believe. Yeah, discard. Yep, you discard this card, negate the activation. So it doesn't just like negate the effect. So if the card says like you can only activate this card once per turn, Bell does negate the activation, so you can attempt to activate that effect again in the same turn. So definitely, I think a more meta call, you know, than anything. I'm not sure this hits like every single deck in the format, but it definitely hits kind of the more represented ones. Moving on, 3 copies of Nadir Servant here, just your general searcher for all of your Dogmatika cards. Also can send pretty much any of your extra deck monsters that you need to get utility from. We have 3 copies of Cursed Eldland because it's your Rhoda for basically all your Golden Land cards, and also gets its effect in the graveyard. One thing to note is always, when this card's face up on the field, you can't declare an attack with anything but zombie monsters, so just make sure that you can get this off the field. Now we have 1 copy of Zodiac Barrage. If it was at more, we'd play it. 3 Fire Formation 10 key as your Rhoda, so basically it just searches you any piece that you need at the specific time. Then we have 3 copies of Eldlich of the Sanguine. We have 1 copy of Dogmatika Punishment. We have 3 copies of Conquistador of the Golden Land, and then 2 copies of Hawquero. Obviously 3 is better just for like the monster removal, and he does have some type of graveyard manipulation or ways to like negate effects in the graveyard, so Hawquero was definitely the weakest one here. I've heard him say it multiple times, and I've heard multiple different people say that Hawquero is just the weakest one out of all of these, so 2 copies is fine. Moving on to the extra, we play 1 copy of Titaniclad, 2 copies of Natis, which is, you know, what he sends off of, let's see, Maximus here, and also Disciples, gets a free pop. 1 copy of PSY-Frame Lord Omega, 1 copy of Wind Pegasus adding Nister, 1 copy of Zeus, 2 copies of Cat, 2 copies of Chalconine, 1 copy of Dryden, and 1 copy of Borbo. We see this all the time, very, very standard package here. Then we play 1 copy of Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, and 1 Link Spider. So Link Spider is good to get rid of these monsters, and it also gets rid of the Nibiru token. Link Spider is just a generic Link 2 that can bait back or get monsters off the field like these if you've already used your Link Spider. And then Blackluster Soldier, this is basically like the Mega Clops of the deck. It's really easy to make. You know, this gets its, you know, ability to have its additional effects. So does Fleur-de-Lis, so does Golden Lord. So any big monster that you can get back on the field and then link off with to make this gives you the ability for either this card to make or gain 1500 attack, this card to make a second attack during the battle phase of your next turn, or banish 1 card on the field. And just remember, you only get this effect if you're using a level 7 or higher monster as material. Also, if you do this, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. It cannot be destroyed by battle by your opponent's card effects either. Also, when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, it has to destroy it by battle. You activate 1 of those following effects. So, moving on to the side deck here, we have 1 PSY-Frame Driver, the best hand trap in the game. 3 copies of PSY-Frame Gear Gamma. It's just okay. Then we have 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird here. This hits a lot of meta decks because pretty much every deck right now is just searching just constantly. So this is really good against Diatron. I think it's pretty good against VW Virtual World as well. Definitely worth citing right now. Then we have 3 Mistaken Arrest. Basically until the end of your next turn after this card resolves, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them. So this basically just like makes Diatron pass. Cosmic Cyclone here, just very good backer removal, really good in the mirror match. Then 1 copy of Anti-Spell and 1 copy of Imperial Order. Now, he was playing this in his last list, but I think it's a lot better now because Diatron relies on a lot of their spell effects resolving or being able to activate to make plays and continue going, considering they're a ritual-based deck. And this does shut them down, so this just makes it to where they can't really play too well, and then this just kind of stalls them for a turn. It lets you get one turn up on your opponent and gain that advantage. So alrighty guys, I think we're at the end of this video here. I want to thank you for tuning in and watching this. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And once again, I'm going to remind you at the end of every one of my videos, there is a giveaway going on. So if we get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year, which it's coming up, we're already at December 13th. Today is Sunday, December 13th. We don't have much time to get us to 100 subscribers, but we are coming up on it. If we do that, I will be doing a giveaway for a random Starlight Rare from my collection. So please guys, subscribe to the channel, make it viewable. Once we hit that point, I will make a video specifically for the giveaway, so do keep your eyes out for that. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks guys, take care.